My name is Thomas Reed. I'm 68 years old, and until a few months ago, I believed I understood every chapter of my life, every decision I'd made, and every truth I carried as a father, a husband, and a man, but everything I thought I knew shattered the moment a stranger called me out of nowhere, paused, and said one single word that froze the blood in my veins. "Dad?" I remember that moment clearly. I was sitting on my porch in Austin, sipping my evening coffee, watching the sun melt behind the trees, when my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something, maybe instinct, maybe fate, made me answer. The voice on the other end was shaky, young, maybe mid-20s. "Mr. Reed?" he said at first. "Yes," I replied. And then came the word that cracked open a part of my life I never knew existed. Dad. The air seemed to vanish around me. My hands began to tremble, and for a moment I couldn't even speak. I think you're my father," the voice continued. My first instinct was denial, complete denial, telling the kid he had the wrong man, that I had only 2 children, both grown, both living their own lives, both very much accounted for. But the boy didn't argue. Instead, he said something that made my heart drop to my stomach. "My mom said your name before she passed away. She told me you never knew." My world tilted. I had lived through heartbreak, loss, illness, and struggle, but nothing compared to the weight of that sentence. I asked his name, and he said, "Evan." Something about his tone, his hesitancy, his pain, it felt real, too real. My mind flashed back to decades ago, my 20s years filled with chaos, odd jobs, bad decisions, and a short relationship with a woman named Lena, a woman who vanished from my life as quickly as she entered it. We had known each other only a few months before drifting apart. I hadn't thought about her in years. But now, suddenly, the past was knocking on my door through a stranger's voice. We talked for nearly an hour. Well, he talked, and I tried to process the earthquake happening inside me. He told me he grew up poor, bouncing between apartments, watching his mother get sick, working 2 jobs since he was 16. He told me she died only 3 weeks before that call, leaving him with nothing but a box of her belongings and a single letter with my name. And then he said something that broke me in a way I wasn't prepared for. "I'm not asking you for money, sir. I just want to know who I am." I don't know how long I stayed silent after that, staring at my hands, wondering how a whole human being, my own blood, could exist without me ever knowing. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything he said, kept imagining his childhood, his struggles, the loneliness he must have felt burying his mother alone. I thought about my own kids who grew up with stability, school, trips, family vacations, warm meals, and I realized Evan had none of that. The guilt hit me like a freight train. Even though I had no idea he existed, I felt like I had failed him somehow. The next morning, without telling my family, I drove 4 hours to meet him in person. I rehearsed what I would say 1,000 times, none of it good enough. When I finally saw him standing outside a small diner in a worn-out hoodie, hands in his pockets, eyes nervous but hopeful, it felt like looking into a mirror of my younger self. Same jawline, same eyes, same awkward stance. It was like God placed a photograph of me 30 years ago right in front of my face. We talked for hours, sharing stories, filling in decades of missing pieces. He told me he grew up watching other kids have fathers and always wondered why he didn't. He told me his mother kept my name, but refused to find me because she didn't want to ruin my life. And when I asked why she finally left him the letter, he looked down and whispered, "She didn't want me to die without family." That sentence nearly broke me in half. I realized then that this wasn't just a shock, it was an opportunity to right a wrong I never knew I made. But life is never simple. When my children, my official family, found out about Evan, everything exploded. My daughter felt betrayed, my son felt threatened, and my daughter-in-law immediately assumed he wanted money. My kids accused me of abandoning them emotionally for someone new. My son-in-law called Evan a scammer before he ever met him. But the worst reaction came from my ex-wife, the woman I spent 25 years with. She confronted me at my house in tears, accusing me of cheating decades ago, something I absolutely did not do. The timeline with Lena was from before I met her, but she didn't want logic. She wanted someone to blame. For weeks, the house was full of arguments, accusations, tears, slammed doors, and tension so thick it felt like fog. Evan saw all of it, heard the yelling, the doubt, the resentment, and one evening he showed up at my door with his backpack on and said, "I don't want to ruin your family. I can go." And that was the moment I truly understood what kind of man he was: kind, selfless, humble, everything my actual children used to be before they allowed fear and insecurity to poison their hearts. I grabbed his arm before he left and told him, "You are my son, and I'm not losing you again." The next morning, I called a family meeting, everyone in the same room, no excuses. I explained everything from the beginning: my relationship with Lena, the truth about the timeline, the fact I never knew he existed. Then I looked each one of my children in the eyes and said something they weren't expecting. Family is not blood. Family is responsibility. I abandoned nothing. I'm trying to repair something that was broken before I even knew it existed. Silence filled the room. My daughter cried first, suddenly realizing she'd been unfair. My son softened next. My ex-wife took longer, but eventually nodded quietly. And little by little, Evan became part of our lives, not forced, not rushed, but gently, slowly, like letting sunlight into a dark room. Weeks passed and something incredible happened. My children began liking him. My daughter helped him get a job interview. My son taught him how to fix cars. My grandkids adored him instantly. And I watched all of it, grateful in a way I can't describe, feeling like life handed me a second chance I never knew I needed. One evening, while we were sitting on the porch together, Evan looked at me and said, "I don't blame you, you know, for not being there." I swallowed hard. "I blame myself," I said. He shook his head. "You didn't know. And you're here now." And then he called me Dad again, not out of confusion, not out of desperation, out of acceptance, real acceptance. That night, when I went to bed, I realized something that still echoes deep inside me. Sometimes family arrives late. Sometimes love appears halfway through life. Sometimes the people meant to be yours find you after decades, and when they do, it shakes everything, but it also repairs everything. A stranger called me Dad, and what I found out after that call didn't just shock my life, it rebuilt it.